Welcome to our class on analyzing a student's literacy skills. Our outcomes today will be to evaluate an English learner's reading skills using a Miscue analysis, and to understand how language transfer impacts English learners' reading skills in the three cueing systems and with comprehension. We will also touch on some key strategies to support students with these cueing systems and with comprehension. These are the 5 components of reading. We won't go into depth on all of the components today, but it's important to note for English learners that they need all 5 components of reading. And as we work through Miscue analysis, you will see where the cueing systems overlap and are integrated into most of the areas. In a study done by the National Literacy Panel for Language and Minority Students, this panel is different than the National Reading Panel you may have heard about in the past. This study asserts that ELLs need 3 more essential components of reading in addition to the big 5 that we usually hear about. These plus 3 are not an add-on. Instead, they are meant to be integrated and considered within the other 5 components. These 3 will impact, for example, how students grow in the other areas and how we teach and support them. So, for example, while we support and teach phonics, we need to remember the impact of background knowledge and oral language development on how ELLs learn and get access to phonics. We also need to consider how we can connect students learning in all of these 5 areas to their native language and culture. Undergirding the need for these 8 components is the idea that meaning is everything for English language learners. Write this quote somewhere and remember it because we will come back to it. Meaning is everything for ELLs, and helping them make meaning first and then alongside the other more skills-based areas will accelerate their growth. So before we dig into our Miscue analysis process, a few quick reminders. Remember, when using a Miscue analysis, we code what the students are using at the point of error. So for example, if they use the meaning cueing system, we wouldn't say they made an error with meaning. They made some kind of error as they decoded, but when they use meaning, that means they were thinking about what made sense when they made that error. Another tip is that once we have done the whole analysis and we see which cueing systems are being used the least, this would often be the first place to look for instructional next steps. This doesn't mean we can't refine the more used cueing systems, but we would want to start definitely with the cueing systems that students aren't accessing yet. Here are some guiding questions you might ask yourself to determine what cueing systems are being used, meaning, syntax, or visual. Meaning and syntax are often the most confused systems. So here are a couple of questions above those to help you think about how you would differentiate between the two. For meaning, you're thinking about, does it make sense contextually or conceptually? In contrast to syntax, where you're thinking about, does it sound right grammatically? Take the example at the bottom of the slide. They always go to the store on Thursday, and the student said goes. In this example, the meaning cueing system was used in this error. Goes is conceptually the same as go, so M would be circled or marked yes. However, syntax is not used at the point of error. Goes does not sound right grammatically. The subject-verb agreement is missing. One way to help know if syntax is used is to read the sentence out loud to yourself with the miscue the student made. In this case, they always goes to the store on Thursday. Then ask yourself, does that sound right grammatically? In this case, it does not, so S would not be marked. It's important to know, though, that this is a common error that ELLs make using different verb forms. Concerning the visual system in this example, they always goes to the store, visual is used, and we'd circle yes. We might also say that it's a medium use of the visual system. The beginning and middle of the word was correct, but not the end. We are going to practice and apply our Miscue analysis process with a student. But first we need to know a little bit about the student we are watching. This is David. David's primary language is Spanish. This video was taken at the beginning of 3rd grade. At that time, David's scores on Access were as follows. Take a look at those. And notice the variation in some of the domains for him. Maybe start to think about what students at these levels can do and what their language sounds like and looks like at these levels. David has been in program for 3.5 years by this point. That means he started in kindergarten, and when he did, he was at a level 1 in all of the domains of access. Thinking about how it takes a year to move from a level 1 to 2, and a year from a 2 to a 3, and then 2 years from a 3 to a 4, David seems to be just a little bit behind as far as typical language growth. This will be something we'll want to keep in mind. In addition, the text that David is reading is a benchmark text called Marvella and the Moon. It is a level F, which would fall in the first grade text level range. Keep in mind that David is currently in 3rd grade. In a moment, you're going to pause this video and work through listening and participating in the analysis with David. There is a running record paper for you to do this on that is linked in the agenda. I would encourage you to print this off so that you can follow along and write on it as you go. Then, once you have that printed, you're going to watch the video of David reading. That video is a different video than this and is linked in your agenda. As you watch the video, take a running record on the paper you printed off. After you have the running record and have watched, then you need to analyze the cueing systems that David used at the point of error, noting M, S, and V. Also, as you watch the video, make sure you are taking notes and following along with David's comprehension. After you have done all of this analysis yourself, you've had some personal practice, then I would like you to compare your findings with the analysis on Exemplar 1, David. This is also linked in your agenda. Once you have done all of this, please resume this screencast. Now that you've had a chance to get an idea of what our student is doing with his reading skills, we are going to first discuss comprehension. The reason for looking at this first is going back to that idea that meaning is everything for ELLs, and that undergirds everything else. So we're going to start there. I also want to point out here how important it is that we had comprehension information from David reading this book. Many times it is noted that his accuracy and fluency fall below a 90%. Sometimes we don't then go on to give comprehension because it's either required or sometimes we are even told not to do so. However, I would like you to reconsider the importance of continuing to ask comprehension questions to English language learners. Why? Because again, meaning is everything. You'll notice, I'm sure, that he actually made quite a bit of meaning throughout the text, even though we may not have known that at first just looking at the accuracy or fluency on the running record part. We have some evidence of that meaning he was making. For example, with hang glider, when he talks about it being a kite during the comprehension part. Also, we were able to uncover vocabulary that he might need. Sometimes we think this might be a decoding need when actually there might be some gaps in vocabulary. We may not have known this if we hadn't given the comprehension and saw what he understood. I encourage you to do the same with your student. Ask them the comprehension questions, even if they don't do as well with fluency and accuracy. You might find they are making more meaning than you might think. So let's get into David's comprehension. In just a moment, pause the slide and walk through the process on it. Go back to your notes on David's comprehension. If you'd like to, you can write them on sticky notes. Take 1 minute for yourself and list as many strengths as you can, and then take another minute and list as many next steps. Pause the video now to participate in this thinking task. The National Literacy Panel found in their study that vocabulary and background knowledge are tightly linked to comprehension and should be targeted throughout the sequence of reading. We are going to take a closer look at vocabulary and background as it ties to comprehension for ELLs and our student David. So take a minute and look at the slide and the quote from the National Literacy Panel for Language and Minority Students. Background knowledge is one of the most important features of comprehending text. We will dig into it a little bit more later in the course as well. However, for now, it's important to know that it is possible to appropriately provide background knowledge to students to help them make meaning of the text and still do the heavy lift of thinking themselves. Providing background knowledge doesn't mean that we are taking the learning away or not allowing students to think. Instead, when we are strategic about what background we provide and how we provide it, it unlocks the text for students. Take a minute and look at some of the key quotes and key concepts that are on this slide. Some strategies to teach background to students are to think about allowing them many opportunities to interact and discuss the text, providing culturally relevant text or text that they might have experiences with that are similar to the characters or concepts in the text, and make sure that we aren't just keeping English learners at a literal understanding. We should always provide opportunities to go to deeper levels with text. So let's tie this learning to David. How did you see correlations to background knowledge and what errors and success David has? If you wrote this on sticky notes, take a moment to pause and look at the notes that might give evidence of this. Not only is background knowledge tied to how well students comprehend, vocabulary is another important component of this. Pause for a moment and read some of the key components on the slide. Something to remember when teaching vocab is that it's much faster and easier to teach a child to connect to what they already know versus to learn something completely from scratch. For example, if they already know the word mad, they can more readily learn angry or irate. If you tell them it's virtually the same thing as mad, this is because our brains are pattern and connection seeking and hold on to concepts better when they can hang on to something that is already there and understood. Another good strategy to support students with vocabulary as it relates to comprehension is to connect to native language and to cognates. Cognates are words that are similar in two languages, visually in both and in their sound. For example, look at the cognate on the slide. An important thing to note about cognates is there will be more cognates between languages that come from a Romance language background. Just remember, it's all about bridging from the known to the unknown. As we think about David, I would like you to take a look at the performance definitions that are linked in your agenda. Once you've pulled those up, especially looking at the receptive, take a look at the word level and pay close attention to level 1, 2, since that is where David is in his literacy access levels. Think about these questions. What kind of vocabulary can he access based on his language proficiency level? Then, how do you see correlations to this and what errors and success he had? Pause and do this thinking task, and then resume the video when you are finished with that. So one thing you may have noticed is that David is working towards being specific with his content language. He could talk about some of the vocabulary more generally, and that definitely matches with what we know about his language proficiency level looking at the performance definitions. A note about this. Hang glider was a vocabulary word that he definitely struggled with, and it's pretty specific and technical. We don't necessarily have to teach the word hang glider, but we can think more globally about what this means for supporting his language development in terms of vocabulary. Now that you've thought about David's comprehension and comprehension for English learners, pause and take a look at the exemplar on David, which is linked in your agenda. Scroll down near the end into the table where you can see the strengths, next steps, and supports for comprehension. Reflect on how this connects to some of the learning that we've already done.